Welcome to Superhero Pow. I'm your host nerd, Tom Frumgen. It's time for another Raiders of the Long Box. Once upon a time, there was a most revered comic book artist and writer from Canada, John Byrne. For nearly 3 years, he wowed fans by drawing the hottest book in town, the all-new, all-different, The X-Men. Then Marvel gave him the keys to draw and write the world's greatest comic magazine, The Fantastic Four. 2 years later, in 1983, Marvel talked John Byrne into writing and drawing their first Canadian superhero team. Come on, John, where's your home pride? Alpha Flight. Alpha Flight was created by John and Chris Claremont as a team to fight the X-Men. Their leader, Vindicator, aka Guardian, first appeared in X-Men number 109, and the rest of the team followed in issue number 120. The plot involved the Canadian government attempting to claim Weapon X, aka Wolverine, as their property, so to speak. Then 4 years later, they got their own comic book, this time as the protagonist. Though John Byrne would walk after 28 issues, Alpha Flight would roll on for another 100 issues, and they've been relaunched several times since. So it's funny to note that John often said he had a horrible time on the book and didn't want to do it in the first place, having no faith in such two-dimensional characters. But it's his work that made the team the success that it was and is. Reading the first 6 issues, you can see how hard Byrne was working to make each member of Alpha Flight a fully developed character. So much so, there's only one real villain in those 6 issues. And frankly, he's quite lame. So all the focus was on defining the heroes. Now let's take a look at those first 6 issues. Issue number 1. Being as clever as he can be, Byrne starts the series with shutting the team down. The government is done with the flight, aka Department H. You see, there was also a Beta Flight and a Gamma Flight. But when a whack job out in the frozen Tundra becomes a giant monster called Tundra, Alpha Flight comes together like any good superhero team. Vindicator, Snowbird, Shaman, North Star, Aurora, and Sasquatch. 2 members of Beta Flight join in, Marina and Puck, thanks to Vindicator's wife thinking that Alpha Flight wasn't going to show up. And then when the monster's put down, the team decides to go it alone without the government. Issue number 2. The character building really kicks in. Aurora is shown to be a split personality. North Star is a flamboyant professional skier using his superpowers to cheat. And Marina, well, we aren't too sure yet. But a lame villain called the Master believes he knows and kidnaps her. Vindicator also gets the idea to change his name to Guardian, and this issue also starts a backup feature. In the beginning, the origins of Alpha Flight. The first chapter giving us the lowdown on James Hudson, the man who would become Guardian. Issue number 3, Alpha Flight minus an injured Puck. That happened last issue, and I'm not going to spoil it for you. Goes searching for the kidnapped Marina. They all wind up on the alien spacecraft that brought Marina to Earth thousands of years ago as just an egg. The Master, who was at first victimized by the spacecraft's AI, has been slowly taking control of the ship and all its advanced technology. Since Marina and her mate, who has yet to be revealed, even to this day, were supposed to take over the world, this Master feels he must kill them first. Just then, Sue Richards and Prince Namor show up. Issue number 4. This issue wraps up the first big story arc as Alpha Flight, aided by the Invisible Woman and the Submariner, free Marina and send the Master running back down his hole. You get it? His hole? He's going down his hole? You get it. Hoping to learn more about herself, spoiler alert, it's a fool's errand, Marina leaves with Prince Namor to visit Atlantis. Issue number 5. This issue centers on Puck, the little person dynamo. In a Stan Lee way, Byrne has made everything about him a walking contradiction. Despite his size, Puck is about as tough and agile as Daredevil or Batman. Plus, he's the most interesting man in the world, and women love him. The plot, though, is about Puck recovering from his injuries. And while at the hospital, he bumps heads with people who are selling drugs on the black market. Over in the Secret Origin backup, we learn that Shaman, clearly not the most original name, is a doctor who lost his wife to cancer and then his young daughter Elizabeth to his grief. In this low period of his life, a la Doctor Strange, Dr. Michael II Youngman comes to accept his birthright and becomes the Shaman Supreme, if you will. Issue number 6. A funny thing happened on the way to issue number 6, Marvel's so-called Assistant Editor Month. You see, the joke went like this. As all the Marvel editors were out of town for the San Diego Comic Convention, their assistants were in charge, and anything could happen. Keep that in mind as we get a better look at Snowbird, a goddess in human form. A la 1940s Captain America stories, her day job was as a corporal in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, where she mostly gives grief to her superior, since he is unaware she is the cold and aloof goddess superhero Snowbird. Elsewhere, Kolomak, an ancient snow beast, starts causing trouble, and Snowbird is off to the rescue. As a snowstorm kicks up around the two fighting, John Byrne treats us to nearly 6 well-thought-out blank pages. That's what you get in Assistant Editor Month. Summing up these first 6 issues, it's easy to see how John Byrne managed to turn a bunch of nobodies into a beloved team that everyone wants to try and recapture the magic of. And as I mentioned, this was all done without one decent villain, although the monsters were cool. So even though Byrne doesn't seem to see it, he did a pretty great job, even making his job harder by adding Beta Flight members to the team, as in more non-characters for him to try and develop. For myself, I'm a big fan of Guardian, Aurora, North Star, Sasquatch, Puck, and Snowbird. I also dig the concept of Beta Flight and Gamma Flight. Byrne sets them up here and uses them really well later. I also really like the concept of Snowbird, how she is meant to be the protector of the land from all kinds of mystical beasties. I'd love to see that plot line expanded into something cool one day. And I should mention that even back then John Byrne was planning to make North Star gay. But Big Jim Shooter thought the comic book public of 1984 wasn't ready to handle that yet. So it would be another 8 years before Marvel would allow Jean Paul to come out of the closet. Now we should talk about John Byrne's art. At this time, he was cranking out 2 full comic books a month, Fantastic Four and Alpha Flight. And that's really hard. I mean, really hard. And Alpha Flight was a great-looking book, too. From awesome monsters to the beauty of Aurora to the acrobatics of Puck to Guardian, who pretty much always looked great. John Byrne was pretty much at the height of his popularity and his talent, and was just crushing everything. He was the king of superheroes in the 1980s. George Perez is probably his closest competition, but I think John was the better writer. If you don't believe me, just send John a message on his website. I'm sure he'll be glad to hear your opinion of him. Now, bonus feature. Let's check out the great ads in these comics. 1983 was all about video games. Look at these. Burger Time, Q*bert, Frogger, Tutankhamun, Popeye, even Kool-Aid. We got the Mile High comic spreads, the typical junk, whatever the dickens the Cracker Jack stories are, and the PBS show 321 Contact? That seems weird, though I do remember watching it. Anyway, thanks for spending time with me as we raid the long boxes. And if you could be so kind to like, subscribe, comment, and send me a pint of your blood, I'd do what? Who the hell wrote that?